Okay, so again, they don't have children for a long time. They pray. Rebecca becomes pregnant. She is pregnant, and suddenly things are very, very rocky in her womb, quite literally. And there's all this kicking and wrestling and jousting. And so she goes and she receives a prophecy. What is the prophecy? The prophecy tells her that there are not just two babies in your womb. That would be too straightforward. There are two nations in your womb. There are two kingdoms in your womb. And there's going to be this perpetual struggle forever. And one is going to overcome the other, and they're forever going to be fighting like cats and dogs. And if you think this pregnancy is rough, wait till you see what happens when the kids grow up, because this is just going to be a drop in the bucket. Okay, sure enough, the kids come out. Esau comes out. Jacob is grasping onto his heel. They call the baby Jacob. Yaakov connected to the Hebrew word akev, heel, because he was holding his brother's heel. And sure enough, the brothers grow up, and they could not be more different. Esau is this very worldly man. He's a hunter. He's outdoorsy. He's out doing his thing. And Jacob is this very nice, sweet, wholesome lad who is dwelling in tents. And, that's pretty much, that's about it. And indeed, from a very young age, Rebecca sees how these dynamics are already playing out. She had these two very, very different young men. And sure enough, their lifestyles could not be more different. And there's this struggle, who will overcome good versus evil, being tame versus being a little bit more wilder, being a man of the field. And sure enough, that is the prophecy that she received. We see it playing out. Now, here's something curious. We're not going to classify this as one of the questions of the class, but I want you to think about this as we start. Rebecca loves Jacob, right? That's pretty understandable. I mean, what nice Jewish mother wouldn't love her quiet, very noble son who's probably on his way to medical school? This is the prototypical Jewish boy. Isaac loves Esau. What's up with that? Now, you want to tell me that he also loved Esau. He didn't hate his son. Well, that's commendable. We never want to hear about parents hating their children. But the verse seems to be extremely specific that Rivka loved Yaakov. And to counter that, Yitzchak, Isaac, loved Esau. So the verse gives an interesting rationalization. If you take a look at the very last verse that we read, chapter 25, verse 28, Isaac loved Esau for the game in his mouth. So Rashi, the foremost biblical commentator, provides two explanations what it means, the game in his mouth. Explanation number one is that Esau was an incredibly talented hunter. And he used to bring his father the delicacies that he would hunt. So on a very basic level, why did Yitzchak love Esau? Because Yitzchak was a carnivore and he loved the good steak. And Jacob wasn't going to bring him steak from the Talmud he was learning. So he liked Esau because Esau was a good cook. He would hunt and he would bring him meat. Explanation number two that Rashi provides, the game in his mouth refers to the game that he would play on his father. Esau would go out and do one thing, and then he'd come home and put on a very, very different garment. He'd come home and he'd have all sorts of philosophical conversations with his father to hopefully try and pull the wool over his father's eyes. What he was out doing all day was one thing, but he'd come home and be very studious and respectful and all into the right things, hoping to kind of impress upon his father that he was indeed involved in the right things. But that's, in general, the story of Jacob and Esau as they grow up. And this is kind of the narrative that takes them till young adulthood, till their teenage years. Okay? Jacob, the dweller of tents, Isaac loves Esau, the game in his mouth, and here we are. Well, the story continues.
It came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were dimmed of sight, and he called his elder son Esau, and he said to him, "Here, please, I have grown old. I do not know the day of my death. Now, please, pick up your implement, your sword and your bow, and go out to the field and trap game for me. Make for me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me, and I will eat, in order that my soul should bless you before I die." Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Listen to my voice, to that which I am commanding you. Go now to the flock and take for me from there 2 goodly goat kids, and I will prepare them as delicious food for your father, such as he loves. You will bring to your father, and he will eat, in order that he should bless you before his death." Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, "Here, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will be in his eyes as a trickster, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing." And his mother said to him, "Your curse is upon me, my son. Only listen to my voice and go take for me." Rebekah took the desirable garments of her elder son Esau, and she dressed her younger son Jacob. And she dressed the goat kid skins on his hands and upon the smoothness of his neck. He came to his father and he said, "Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac said to Jacob, "Please approach and I will feel you, my son. Are you this, my son, Esau, or not?" Jacob approached his father Isaac, and he felt him, and he said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were as the hands of his brother Esau, hairy, and he blessed him. God shall give to you of the dew of the heavens, and the fat of the earth, and an abundance of grain and wine. Nations will serve you, and kingdoms will bow to you. You shall be a master over your brothers, and your mother's sons shall bow to you. Those who curse you shall be cursed, and those who bless you shall be blessed.
Hear me on Zoom? We all good? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? This is very strange. Okay. Ricardo had asked earlier what nation comes from Esau. Ricardo, hold that thought. I will get to it in a moment. So, lesson text number 2 is where things get a little bit more exciting. So we have this whole subterfuge. We have this great story. Isaac wants to bless Esau. Rebekah's eavesdropping. She's sending Jacob in there with these skins over his arms, and she's preparing her own delicacies. And Jacob steals the blessings from his brother. Now, I want to qualify one statement. There is a third textual passage that we will get to shortly. So this is not the end of the story. Hold your fire if you have any more questions on the actual narrative. But before that, I want to address the 5 questions. Week 1 was 7. Last week was 4. This week we're at 5. 5 questions that will be guiding us through tonight's conversation. Question number 1. What is the deeper meaning of the 2 kingdoms? What are they fighting for? So the angel, the prophet, God communicates to Rebekah when she's pregnant that you're not just having pregnancy issues, that your babies are kicking each other. Your babies are each emblematic of something larger, something bigger. And they're having this fight, this battle between these 2 kingdoms. One strives to overcome the other. Right? That's great. A couple weeks ago, I was on the New York City subway, and a preacher on the subway told me the same thing, that I represent. It's great talk, but what's it referring to? You have 2 babies, they're kicking each other. You have twins, they're going to grow up, they're not going to like each other. What are these 2 kingdoms at play? What are these big ideas that these 2 children signify? What exactly are we referring to over here? Is this going to be a generational fight? Are we talking about military war? Are we talking about ideas? What are the 2 things that are signified by Jacob and Esau? Question number 1. Question number 2. So Jacob is destined to be the stronger brother. In the prophecy, I'm going to refer to them with their biblical names. Rivka, and I'm also going to switch back and forth between Rivka and Rebekah and confuse myself all night. Rivka is told as much, that V'rav Yavoid Tzoir, the elder will serve the younger. The younger is going to grow up and he's going to be far bigger, more powerful, more successful, whatever that exactly means, which we'll talk about tonight, than the older one. If that's the way things are supposed to be, let's make Jacob the older brother. Why is this whole counterintuitive thing in place, where Esav is born before Jacob by a hair? Jacob comes out clutching onto Esav's heel to prevent him from being born first. Yet Rivka is told that the elder will serve the younger, because that's a novelty. That's something which is required to be told because it's counterintuitive. Usually the younger would serve the elder. So if the whole point was that one day Jacob would be served by Esav, Yaakov would be served by Esav, why don't we just keep things simple and make Yaakov be born first? Why must he be younger? And then we have to flip the thing on its head that the elder will serve the younger. Question number 3, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Why did Isaac, Yitzchak, prefer materialistic Esav over spiritual Yaakov? Well, Rivka saw it in the opposite way, and I think that the second half of the question provides a good twist that we didn't talk about earlier. If Yitzchak was alone in having his preference for Esav, and that's all the verse would tell us, that Yitzchak loved Esav, I could sit here all night and tell you a long story about why that was, what Yitzchak saw in Esav. And we would all be left to our assumptions that no one really cared for Yaakov. But the verse goes out of its way to tell us that Rivka favored Yaakov. Rivka saw something in Yaakov. It seems like the difference here is not so much between the boys as much as between their parents. It seems like Rivka has the ability to see something in Yaakov, which is the more common sense one. Yaakov is the simple one, the one who's dwelling in tents, who's dedicating his life to spirituality, who lives a much tamer and more simple life than his Bulvan, his wild older brother. Whereas there's something that Yitzchak sees in Esav that his wife disagrees with. So what is it indeed that Yitzchak saw in his very untamed son? And why is it indeed that Rivka did not see the issue simply? Question number 4. I don't know about you, but when I was reading the second text, I got very hungry. I had pasta for dinner tonight, and I'm hearing all about this delicious meal. Esav is going out to the field, and he's hunting, and he's bringing his father delicacies, and he's bringing his father delicacies. Why? What's the delicacies for? He's bringing his father delicacies in order that his father should bless him. It almost sounds like, the better the steak is, the more blessings you'll get. This is what spiritual... Isaac is one of our patriarchs. The man is over 120 years old in the story. He's blind. And what's he worried about before he blesses his son? And he's not just blessing him, a blessing. He's giving him these blessings for which he's waited his entire life. He thinks he's about to die. And what are the blessings contingent on? Delicacies. Go out, hunt, bring me a good shtickle fleisch, bring me a nice piece of meat, and then I will bless you. Number 4, why the preparation of tasty food? Question number 5 is the one that should really shout out from the page. Jewish women, they have a way of imposing their will. Okay? No, Scott disagrees. So some Jewish women, Scott, a small percentage. Yitzchak is old. He's blind. He's at the end of his life. Now, spoiler alert, he would actually go on to live another 60 years. But that's a conversation that we're actually going to have more next week. But he thinks the end is near. So as a result of that, he wants to bless his son. So he sends Esav out to the field to go hunt for him to bring him delicacies. Rivka disagrees with her husband, and Rivka thinks these blessings should go to Jacob. What would a good Jewish woman do? March into her husband's room, broomstick in hand, and say, "You idiot. You're going to give the blessings to that wild animal? You'll do no such thing, Isaac. You hear me? You'll do no such thing. Jacob's coming in here now. You will bless Jacob. You'll give him all the blessings you're going to give Esau, and that's the end of the story. I don't want to hear another word about it." No, it's not what Rivka does. Rivka gets busy. All of a sudden, she's busy. She's taking these clothes from the closet, and she's dressing up Jacob, and she's making her own steaks on the side, and she's rushing them into Isaac's room. Let Rivka go in there and state her case. Sugar. You're going to bless the wild animal of a son that you've raised who's out there hunting and killing and murdering and doing chesed. Here you're going to give the blessings to? We have this nice, sweet boy who enjoys studying Torah and a little bit of salsa dancing on the side. He wouldn't hurt a fly. Give him the blessings. No, Rivka doesn't say a word to her husband about it. Instead, she pulls the wool over his eyes. So the obvious question is, why the deception? Let's have a conversation. Communication between spouses is so important. Have a conversation. Tell your husband how you feel, and a revolving. These are the questions which are going to frame our conversation tonight. Any questions on the questions?
Yeah. I like the way he humorously presents it.
Got a little bit of feedback. If everyone can make sure they are muted, thank you very kindly. I would appreciate that. Here. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with the first question that we posed. What is this big fight that's going on over here? The angel describes to Rivka that there are these two kingdoms, these two nations, they're going to be fighting perpetually. What are we fighting over? What exactly was the problem between these two brothers? Throughout Jewish literature, we are told, indeed, as we suspected, as we started discussing, that Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esau, represent two completely different mentalities, two different realities, two different perspectives. And we're going to break this down now across 4 different levels, and we're going to go deeper and deeper as we have this conversation. Join me for a moment in figure 3.1 on page 83 of your book. The Esau and Yaakov duality. We're going to go through history, daily life, the internal self, and ultimately what they represent in a cosmic sense. This question earlier, what is the nation that came forth from Esau? The nation that came forth from Jacob, we all know. We're the ones who are sitting here. Who is the nation that came forth from Esau? The nation that came forth from Esau are the Romans. And indeed, hundreds of years of Jewish history were marked by a battle between Rome and Judea. The Romans were actually the first group of people historically that really sought to persecute the Jewish people in a very systematic way. After the Jewish people had claimed territory, had claimed rulership over their land in the story of Hanukkah, which we're about to celebrate, the Romans were the first ones who came in and ran show over the Jewish people. They began to really persecute the Jewish people. They began to enact decrees. They were the ones who destroyed one of the holy temples. And the Jewish people would rebel. And every time there was a rebellion, the rebellion would be greeted with harsher measures and more persecution and more killing. And the tension between Rome and Judea, between the Romans and the Jews, was something which was a very, very central theme to the Jewish people. In fact, in a lot of our literature that we say on days of mourning and days of sadness, we still reference the entirety of the non-Jewish world as the Romans. As the Romans kind of have this place in our history as being the ones who always did us harm.
What about the Egyptians?
So excellent question. The Egyptians, first of all, we got to their turf.
Oh.
Second of all, when the Egyptian persecution began, we weren't a people yet. We were a family, a very large family, but we hadn't become a people that had claimed sovereignty over a certain land. You know, it was different than a group of people attacking us. The Egyptians then were the world power. They controlled most of the inhabited world. We lived in their land, and things didn't go so harmoniously. But in terms of a nation, you know, a qualified nation that had a ruler and had military power, staking claim and tormenting another nation, Rome was the first one to do that to the Jewish people historically. So on a pretty basic level, on a logistical level, the battle between Yaakov and Esau, two brothers who are jostling in the womb as, you know, pre-infants, is something which would spill out over thousands of years between their descendants, the Jews and the Romans. Now, there's something very, very profound over here. The Romans obviously were far bigger than the Jewish people. The Romans were obviously far mightier than the Jewish people. But I have a question for you. Have you seen any Romans recently? Have you ever been to Roman land recently? I mean, Rome is still a nice little, beautiful city to visit in Italy. That's not the Romans anymore. So it's interesting to note that though the Romans were the world power, the Romans were the world beaters, and we were the Nebuchs, we were the Jewish people who were always on the receiving end of their flexing of being a world power, yet thousands of years later, Jacob's descendants are here, more or less fully intact to tell the tale, and the Romans are a sliver of ancient history, relegated to the history books. Beyond the fighting between Judea and Rome, beyond the fighting between Jacob and Esau, we know that a lot of the society that we live in, the world today, has offshoots, has a lot that has learned a lot from their predecessors from Rome and Judea. So if you join me for a second, the first question we're going to tackle, I'm going to ask the Zoomers to join in by chat, if you don't mind. Take a look for a second on page 84. The questions for discussion. What influences of historical Rome can you identify? Here it says American society. Let's call it global society. Can you identify in global society today? The Romans are gone, but a lot of Roman influence actually exists in the world today. Does anybody have any examples of Roman influence in the world today?
Systems of education.
Systems of education, great opulence. You know, we live in a world where we value the biggest mansion, the nicest car, the largest boat, which is a very Roman mentality. They were really the first ones to pioneer that greatness of matter. And they lived such a life, which, even though they're gone, is still a very active mentality still today. Joshua and Myra online have set the calendar. That's correct. Very good, Joshua and Myra. Let's move on to question number 2. What influences of historical Judea can you identify in American society today? Well, for us, it's a little bit different because we're still here. But what influences of Jewish culture have affected the world on a global level even today? Any thoughts? I'm sorry? A lot. Well, I'd say, for example, I think the concept of a belief in God, dedication to ideas of social justice, a lot of concepts of morality, of altruism, of living life in a society which is dedicated to a certain belief system. Kalila points out that most laws come from the Torah, most laws of a modern structure, not a Jewish structure, come from the Torah. These are all from the more Judaic influence. Going back, Damien actually very correctly says that a lot of our architecture today is Roman. So again, though the Romans are gone, these mentalities, the mentalities of Rome versus Judea, if we think about it, are still fighting, are still challenging one another even today. This battle between these two mentalities, between these two babies jostling in the womb, is a battle that we still experience the after effects of even till today. That was all level 1 from a historical standpoint. Let's continue into level 2. The battle, I'm jumping back to figure 3.1, the battle between Esau and Jacob, Esav and Yaakov, is the battle of materialism versus spirituality. And there's a beautiful, beautiful lesson contained in something which Yitzchak says to Yaakov when he's standing before him in the middle of the deception. Hop back for a sec to page 82 in your book, lines 45 to 46, right? Put yourself in Yitzchak's shoes for a moment. He's a little perplexed. In comes his son, whom he had sent out to the field a short while ago, and he notifies him the dinner is ready. Now, we'll actually see later on in the verses, there's a very different way how Jacob would speak to his father and how Esau would speak to his father. So Yitzchak is sitting there on his chair. He is blind, and in walks his son, and his son is speaking to him very sensitively and politely. He says, "You're Esau?" It's not how Esau speaks. And Jacob says, "Yes." So Yitzchak says, "Why don't you come close so I can feel your arms to make sure you're the hairy one?" And so Jacob comes forward, and Yitzchak feels his arms. And what does Yitzchak say? The voice is the voice of Yaakov, and the hands are the hands of Esau. It's like my two kids merged into one. He speaks sensitively, but he's got hairy arms. Who is this kid? Our commentators explain that contained in this confused sentiment shared by Isaac is a very, very powerful idea. That the mentalities that were perpetuated by Jacob and Esau can never live in the same place. Jacob is voice, and Isaac is hands. Scott, read for us, please, text 3, taken from the Medrash on page 85.
Two legacies that Isaac bequeathed to his two sons. To Jacob he gave the voice, as it is written, quote, "The voice is the voice of Jacob," unquote. And to Esau he gave the hands, as it is written, quote, "And the hands are the hands of Esau," unquote.
So we see over here that there's a fundamental difference between everything we experience in this world. Everything we experience in this world can be broken up into one of two things: spirit and matter. Spirit and matter usually, by definition, are at odds with one another. And here's something profound. Matter is the only thing which seems real in this world. Matters of spirit, ideas, sentiments, principles, feelings, are not real in the sense that we can't touch them. We can't feel them the same way we do matter. Yet, although in our experience, matter is more real than spirit, the unique thing about spiritual realities is that they are the only thing in this world that have real, true, and enduring value. Any bit of matter in this world will one day cease to exist. Whereas spiritual realities, I've mentioned before, sentiments, ideas, experiences, and feelings, they live on forever. Yes, God?
Was Isaac really confused?
Isaac was deeply confused, and we're going to talk about that shortly. Isaac was deeply, deeply confused.
Or was he just trying to meld the two?
Excellent question. Excellent question. We're going to get to that. And on the contrary, through class tonight, we're going to see that this was not the bumbling of a blind old man. There was real philosophical turmoil going on in Isaac's. So again, Jacob and Esau, beyond just being the forefathers of two ancient legacies of two great world superpowers, represent fundamental realities which are always at odds with one another in this world, the clash between spirit and matter. Let's move on to the third distinction between Jacob and Esau, which is classified in the chart in our book. The difference in our internal self between self-realization and self-transcendence. According to the Kabbalah, we're getting a little bit more mystical over here. Jacob and Esau represent the difference between two parts of ourselves that live on inside us forever, known in the Kabbalah as two souls. Esau is representative of the animal soul, and Jacob is representative of the godly soul. And throughout the Tanya, which many of you former J-Life students have come across multiple times and will be taught again later this year actually, the fundamental difference between the animal soul which resides within us and the godly soul which resides within us is a very basic one indeed. The animal soul looks at any and every situation that we come across in life and brings it down to one question: what will benefit me? In any crossroads that I come to, any question that I have in life, any challenge that I have in life, I have one question: what choice will benefit me? The animal soul is self-centered. Now, self-centered is not always a bad thing. At times, we must look out for ourselves because no one else is looking out for us more than ourselves. But the animal soul is self-centered. The divine soul is God-centered. At every crossroads which it comes to in life, every question, every challenge, the godly soul has one focus point. What does God want out of the situation? And if I find myself in a situation where my desires and God's desires cannot coexist, I will always choose God's desires over my desires. So again, bringing this down a little bit deeper, we talked about Rome and Judea, we talked about spirit and matter. Now we're talking about the internal spiritual difference that lives on within us, the choice to prioritize self or to prioritize God. Again, two choices that are represented by Yaakov and Esau, by Jacob and Esau. And lastly, this is what we're going to spend the bulk of our time on tonight. Let's talk about the difference between Yaakov and Esau in the cosmic sense. And in the chart that you have in your books on page 83, there are two very innocuous words at the bottom of the chart. The difference in the cosmic sense is the difference between tohu and tikkun. Okay? I'm going to begin by providing a very basic English translation for those two words. And tikkun is a world of rectification. Before we dwell and we delve into what the world of chaos and the world of rectification are and what those exactly mean, I want to provide two brief introductions to our conversation about tohu and tikkun. For starters, until now, this chart that we have been using on page 83 has been following a pretty basic model. everything in the Jacob column is good, and everything in the Esau column is bad, right? Jews good, Romans bad. Spirit good, matter positive, matter is okay. God focused good, self focused not so good. I wouldn't say good and bad, but there's been pretty clearly drawn battle lines between the two of them. Once we get into the cosmic sense, when we speak about these spiritual realities, we're no longer speaking about good and bad. I want to be very clear about that. Tohu and tikkun, chaos and rectification, is not good and bad. They each have severe disadvantages, and they each have incredible advantages as they exist in a cosmic sense. So the gap between the top three items on that chart and the fourth is a wide one, and I want that to be your guiding principle as we engage in this conversation about Tohu and Tikkun, because if we use good and bad as our guideposts in this conversation, things tend to get a little sideways. Introduction number 2, this is a Kabbalistic topic, which I could stand here from tonight until next Monday night at 7:30, and I would not yet get to the depths of the difference between Tohu and Tikkun. So to cram it into the next 51 minutes is, I want you to understand that we're going to barely scratch the surface of the conversation, and obviously there's a lot more on the topic that exists, but we're going to discuss certain aspects of this world of chaos and world of rectification and what that exactly means, and hopefully that will give us some insight into this entire story. Carlos, if you don't mind, page 86, if you read for us, please, text 4.
To understand the root of the difference between Tohu and Tikkun and how Tikkun comes to rectify and refine Tohu, Sardinas formed from to its substance. As is known, the lights of Tohu were extremely powerful and intense, as the prevalent state of abundant light and scant vessels. Because the vessels were unable to contain the light, they shattered and fell. Following that, the Tikkun reality was made, with scant light and abundant vessels, with the result that the lights are sustained within the vessels.
I hope, it is my sincere hope, that you look at text 4 and are deeply puzzled. I remember the first time when I was in yeshiva, I was in high school, I was 15 in 10th grade, the first time we ever studied Hasidic text, discussing Tohu and Tikkun. And anytime that you have this conversation, the conversation immediately centers around the mystical topics of Iris and Kalim, of lights and vessels. And I remember our teacher that year saying, in order to properly get into this conversation, you need to remove the first image that comes into your mind. Because the first thing that you think of when you see light, abundant light in scant vessels, or abundant vessels in scant light, is you picture someone standing by a window holding a big frying pan, trying to get a lot of light into the frying pan, or you have a sauteing pan or a bigger pan or a saucepan, 5 quart, 10 quart, how much sun can you fit into your pot? So get rid of that for a second. Stop thinking about frying pans and saucepans and quart pans and stock pans and sunlight. Let's try and reframe the conversation around lights and vessels. Lights and vessels, orot and kelim, are fundamental terms in Hasidic philosophy. What are lights and vessels? Of any matter, of anything, everything, every spiritual being, the essence of the thing itself. The vessel is the structure. Now, there are some great examples of this on page 87 in your book. We're going to go through this chart together. We'll really dwell on a few of the examples, but there's 5 different examples of areas where we see light and vessel working together. Now, for starters, there's a fundamental pillar of Jewish mysticism that for anything to exist, there must be a fusion of light and vessels. One cannot exist without the other. There cannot be light without a vessel to go into, and a vessel without light being inside it is a waste of space. Ultimately, the question is, how much light and how much vessels? How much essence and how much structure? Let's use two of the examples on page 87. Let's start with a book. Let's say I have a great idea. I have a great story to tell you. An incredible story. Thought of an amazing fictional story. Powerful lessons, great characters, characters. It's going to be a bestseller. It all exists up here. What do I need to be able to do to take this great idea that exists in my brain and turn it into a bestseller? I need great words. I need a structure for the thoughts that exist in my head. I need words for my ideas. My ideas might be profound. They might be life-changing. If I don't have the right words to transform those ideas into, the ideas will remain in my head and I will not sell a single copy. So we see how ideas need words. On the other hand, I might be a great wordsmith. I might know lots of words, and I might be great at grammar, and everything which I write is profound. If I don't have an idea to convey to you, I can write all the words I want in a book. The words are meaningless. Just a run-on stream of words that mean nothing, because the words need to convey an idea. So if there's no light, if there's no essence, if there's no idea, words are meaningless. They are a waste of my time and your time. So there's a fusion. There's a fusion of words and ideas. Let's use the relationship example. Okay? In every relationship, we have love. And I'm not just speaking about a romantic relationship. In any sort of relationship, there's an affection that draws the two people together. That affection is great. That affection is key. That affection is what makes the entire relationship roll. What happens if that relationship stays in the area, in the space of deep, powerful emotions and never translates itself to doing anything which the other party wants? We can love each other from today till tomorrow, but if you annoy me, it's the end of our relationship. If you cannot conduct yourself in a way in our relationship that I appreciate, that is beneficial to me, or God forbid it's harmful to me, our relationship is over. So the love, the energy, needs structure. It needs something in which it can reside, which can be the implement of the love. On the other hand, if it's all about the structure, if it's all about the actions, and the two parties in the relationship never take the time to think about what motivates that relationship, you have empty actions. You have actions that are not motivated, they don't have a life force behind them, and eventually the actions will die. So again, there's a fusion of essence and structure, lights and vessels. I want to provide one more analogy because this really gives us the ability to see the advantages and the disadvantages in both, because I want to take one situation with two people and pit them side by side against each other. This is the way it was taught to me back when I was in yeshiva. I want to think about this in the professional sense, in the corporate sense. You have a company. Every company has tohu employees and tikkun employees. Let's start with tikkun employees. You know what tikkun employees are? Tikkun employees are the ones that you can find at their desk at 9 o'clock sharp every single morning. Not 9:01, 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, they are at their desk waiting for the tasks of the day to begin. If you give them tasks, they will perform them meticulously. Give them a checklist, they excel. They will do exactly what they are asked to do. They're great rule followers. They're wonderful task accomplishers. They do their thing. They answer their calls. They respond to their emails. They take their lunch break. And at 5 o'clock, they're away from their desk. Not 5:01, 5 o'clock, they're up and at it. Tikkun employees. Every company also has tohu employees. Do you know where you're going to find the tohu employee at 9 o'clock?
Might be in bed.
Well, you can find him in any number of places. He might be at his desk. He might be in bed. He might be in Maui. He might be making his third cup of coffee for the morning. You don't know where you're going to find your tohu employee. Once he eventually, Johnny-come-lately, makes it to his desk, you have no idea what to expect from him that day at his desk. He might have his feet up on his desk playing on his phone. He might be changing the company structure. He might be reinventing an incredible topic. He might not be in the office. You know where to find him at 5 o'clock? Well, he might be out. He might be putting in an all-nighter and staying at his desk till the next morning till he completes this task that he's fixated on. You just don't know. Now let's really contrast Mr. Tohu and Mr. Tikkun. Suppose your company is getting together and your company is undergoing an audit. And your company needs to go through tens of thousands of pages of financial records. Very, very, very tedious work. So you, Mr. or Miss CEO, you walk around the office and you place 500 pages of financial records on every employee's desk. and you say, guys, it's 9 o'clock, 5 o'clock's in 8 hours. You have the day to go through this page of financial records. Tikkun excels in this. This is it. There's lists, there's pages, there's numbers. This is fantastic. He will not remove his rear end from his chair until he's gone through his plan. Once Tohu has finished making his 6th cup of coffee, he finally gets to the papers on his desk, and after he spent 30 seconds focusing on the first paper, he has a question. Why are we even doing this? Why are we having an audit? Why don't we try to restructure the whole company so we don't have to have an audit? In fact, why don't we offshore all of our jobs to China and move the rest of the products somewhere else, and we don't have to have audits and no taxes, and it's great, right? So there are some structures in which Tikkun thrives. You want someone to go through a stack of papers, Tikkun is your man. What if the company calls a meeting at the end of the year, yeah, we're at the end of the year now, and CEO gets up in front of the entire company and says, ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken to our shareholders, and in 2021, we want to reinvent our company. We want to think of something big. We want to do something crazy. I want you all to think outside the box and totally reinvent the way our company does business. Tohu is licking his chops. Thinking big, going outside the box, reinventing things. I can do this. And he is churning out idea after idea after idea. You know what Tikkun does? Tikkun sits there at his chair in the conference room. And he has his yellow legal pad that he brought into the meeting. And he writes at the top of his paper, line item, think outside the box. Okay? And he checks. Yeah, he thought outside the box for 30 seconds. He's good to go. Tohu, on the other hand, doesn't even know there's a box that you're supposed to be thinking inside generally that you now need to think outside the box. He's hopping around the room. He's reinvented the whole corporate world. There are some situations in which Tohu occurs. So in the fundamental difference between Tohu and Tikkun, we have to remember that neither one is good or bad. Neither reality is good or bad. Let's take a look for a second on page 88, the questions for discussion.
Wait, before you do.
Yes, John.
Given that explanation, and those analogies that you've given us, I wonder if Jacob was really Tikkun and Esau was really Tohu.
Okay, we're almost there.
All right.
Let's start on page 88. What are the advantages of the Tikkun? Tikkun is the scant light and abundant vessels. I know I told you to stop thinking about cups and pots, but here they have cups. And the cups are mostly half full, or less so. They are. What are the advantages of the Tikkun reality? Well, on a very basic level, the Tikkun reality, everything is very, very harmonious. Everything fits. Everything has a place. You ever walk into those closets, those Instagram-worthy closets, where every sock has its place? And Jody's with me. Jody's like crazy people. Yeah, who even lives like that? But Tikkun is a world of harmony. Everything has a place. The disadvantage of the Tikkun model is that it lacks passion. It lacks spontaneity. It lacks a little excitement. It lacks a little life. It's a little bit too harmonious sometimes. Again, that's not bad. It's not advantageous. It's boring. It's boring. Boring is fair, but it's not bad. Hop for a second to the other side of page 88. Here we have the overflowing cup. His cup runneth over. Tohu's cup is runnething over. On page 88, what are the advantages of the Tohu model? And what are the disadvantages of the Tohu model? Well, it's the flip side of the Tikkun. The advantage is that it's passionate. There's vitality. Something's exciting. There's always something going on. There's energy in the air. It's extremely unstable. Very unpredictable. As we gave the advantage of our Tohu employee who sometimes shows up to work, he sometimes doesn't show up to work. He's very ambitious. He could be very innovative, but not a lot of predictability. Now, I want to zero in for a second, specifically on the hazards of Tohu, on the dangers of Tohu. And again, I want to fall back on two of the examples that we have, actually, you know what, I'll focus in on one example. So we use the corporate model. So I want to, again, use a business as an example. You have a business that is A, flush with cash, B, flush with good ideas, does not have any strategy. Okay? Tohu business. Tohu Inc., LLC. What could go wrong?
Everything.
Everything. And on a very basic level, I want to break it down into, step one and then what's worse, step two. Step one is that it could just fizzle, right? Without a strategy, you have all the money and all the good ideas, but without anything to guide that money and those ideas, it just evaporates into thin air. Step two, what's worse, is that without a strategy, you could end up worse than you started. If you have a lot of money and a lot of good ideas, and you have no way to guide those money and those good ideas, you'll lose your money and you'll lose your good ideas. You could end up worse off if Tohu really goes unchecked, that then you allow these unbridled passions to start controlling you, and you're borrowing money from other people just to feed your ambitions and feed your whatevers, and suddenly the Tohu model, instead of guiding you to success, is completely taking you off the deep end. Why do I bring this up? I want to jump ahead for a second. Hop to page 89 for a moment. The question for discussion. Which are the more powerful forces in our lives? Tohu or Tikkun? Let's get a few slides over here. Forces in our lives. Tohu or Tikkun? I don't mean to shame anybody over here. There are a lot of philanthropists who have been very, very successful in their professional lives, and they have decided to dedicate a large portion of their earnings to charity. If you were to analyze these incredible human beings' lives, where would you say that they have invested more passion? In making their work successful or making their philanthropy successful? Now, we can make the argument that, well, they've raised all that money so they could be philanthropic. But for the most part, the human desire, when we have an opportunity to pursue something which will add in our fame and our success and now in our bottom line, usually we will place more energy and more excitement in that than giving all that money to charity. I would make that argument.
Just because you invest all of that time and effort into something doesn't mean you're necessarily more passionate than what you choose to give it to.
So passion is a good point. Let's talk about what gets your kishkis going. What gets, and let's not use Mr. Gates as an example. Your average guy on the street. What are they investing more energy? Where is their head? Where is their heart? Where is their energy? In succeeding for them and their families? In making a living? In going for it? Or in spiritual pursuits?
If you achieve one, you can enjoy the other.
Fair enough. But I think that, let me give you an example, okay? Suppose for a second that on the off-ramp of the I-80, there was a sign, $300 bills, okay? How many people would fly off the highway to pick up $100? Contrast that with the old woman standing on the off-ramp of the I-80 asking for money. How many people rush to give that person money? A lot less than the people who would be rushing to pick money off the floor if there was that option. So Tohu, the forces of passion, of energy, of caring for ourselves, of being unbridled, are usually more powerful in our own lives than our tikkun reality, than our structured, more altruistic, let's call it, more God-based realities. Now let's hop back for a second. Let's go back to the question for discussion. If you were God, before I read the question inside, if you were God, what model would you create first? Or what model would you create at all? Well, we've talked about the fact that Tohu is pretty non-sustainable, right? Tohu crashes and burns, doesn't have a structure. So if I were God, I would probably just create a tikkun model. The tikkun model would be very boring, like the clause that Jody and I laughed at before. There's not a lot of excitement there, but at least it's sustainable. Well, God actually decided to do both. God first created a Tohu model of the world, and guess what? You know what happened to the Tohu model? It crashed and burned. It didn't succeed. And then God created a tikkun reality. This is what's brought down in Kabbalah. God created both. First tohu, and that order is very specific. First tohu, then tikkun. Well, leads us to our question. If the tohu model for creation is prone to failure, why not skip the tohu phase and go straight to tikkun? Right? If we knew that tohu was bound to crash and burn, why create tohu at all? Let's leave that hypothetical. We'll live in a tikkun world, and we'll all sit and yearn for a world that doesn't exist for a tohu world. Explains Jewish mysticism because God didn't want to have one or the other. God ultimately wanted to have both. So God created a tohu world. Tohu world fizzled royally, but royally. Then God created a tikkun. Ultimately, what is the point? The tikkun world, the tikkun reality, can draw into it from the remnants of the tohu reality that crashed and burned. That the tikkun world, the boring world, but very structured world, can have an influx of that excitement and that passion and that energy within the structure. So we can have abundant vessels and abundant light. We can have an incredible amount of passion and yet be able to marshal that passion, control that passion, and manage that passion. So why was tohu created if it was it allows us to utilize the advantages of both models.
Isn't that a balanced person? Mm-hmm.
That is ultimately a balanced person. Yes, someone who has too much of one is unfortunately missing out. Absolutely. So now, let's start putting things together. Now that we've finished this deeply Kabbalistic conversation, let's bring it back to the unidentifiable twins. Earlier, I asked you a question. Question number 2 from our original questions. The angel tells Rivka that you're going to have twins. They're going to forever be fighting with one another, and ultimately, the younger will rule over the older. The older brother is going to end up worshiping his younger brother. And we asked, so why? What's the point of that? Just make Jacob initially the elder one, and we will be good to go. Explains Jewish mysticism. A very, very fundamental concept. The higher something is, the lower that's represented by tohu. Esav is the older brother. Ultimately, the older brother falls. The tohu world falls, and it falls into the tikkun world. And ultimately, the aspiration of tohu is to be marshaled by tikkun, is to be controlled by tikkun. Intentionally so. There's a reason why tohu comes first. And what God did not do, God did not create tikkun first and sprinkle in a little bit of tohu afterwards. No, God wanted to take the higher dimension, the more powerful spiritual reality, and sprinkle that into a world which is controlled by tikkun. Ultimately, the goal is God realized that an effective reality would be one that is controlled by a tikkun reality. Yet, what makes it exciting, what makes it worth living, is if we have the tohu inside it. So Jacob is the younger brother. Tikkun is the second reality. And that is why the Jacob in our life faces an uphill battle. Tikkun is forever struggling to control tohu. That is its purpose, that is its destiny, and it is forever going to be a challenge for it to realize that destiny. Because ultimately it was created second. It was created after tohu. And so ultimately what our job is as Jews, as the descendants of Jacob, is to lead a tikkun life with an influence of tohu in it. To lead what Jody referred to as earlier, I believe it was Jody, well, it was someone at the front table, sorry guys. So lead what Jody referred to earlier as a balanced life. But that desire to lead that balanced life in which tikkun is able to control tohu, in which the younger brother controls the older brother, in which the second reality controls the first reality, that is forever going to be an uphill battle, exactly as the angel told Rebecca. Because if you want to have the influence and the effect of tohu in a tikkun reality, it's not simple. because you're taking that tikkun, that tohu reality, and forcing it to completely go against its nature. Any questions? Okay. With that in mind, I now want to share with you the end of the story.
And it was, just as Jacob was going out from the presence of his father, that his brother Esau came from his hunt. And he said to his father, "My father should get up and eat of the game of his son, in order that your soul should bless me." And his father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am your firstborn son Esau." Isaac trembled an exceedingly great trembling, and he said, "Who then is the one who trapped game and brought it to me? And I ate of it all before you had come, and I blessed him. Also blessed shall he be." As Esau heard the words of his father, he cried an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and he said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." And he said, "Your brother came with cunning and took your blessing." And he said, "Is this why his name was called Jacob? Twice he has deceived me. He took my birthright, and here now he has taken my blessing." And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Here I have placed him master to you, and all his brothers I have given to him as servants, and with grain and wine I have supported him. And for you, then, what shall I do, my son?" And Esau said to his father, "Have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me, also me, my father." And Esau raised his voice, and he wept. And his father Isaac answered, and he said to him, "Here, the fat of the land will be your settlement, and of the dew of the heavens above. By your sword you will live, and your brother you will serve. And it will be that when you are aggrieved, you will cast off his yoke from upon your neck."
Rebekah finds out that Esau is so angry over having been cheated out of the blessings that he is plotting to kill Jacob. So she convinces Isaac that it is time for Jacob to travel to her hometown, Haran, to find a wife.
Isaac called Jacob, and he blessed him, and he instructed him, and he said to him, "Arise, and go to Paddan Aram, and take yourself a wife from there, from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. And the Almighty God will bless you, and make you fruitful, and multiply you, and you will become a community of peoples. And he will grant you the blessing of Abraham to you, and to your seed with you, to inherit you the land of your dwelling, which God has given to Abraham."
So now things make absolutely no sense. Let's really analyze the text that we just went over. Jacob comes in, Isaac left. Jacob leaves. Literally, the moment Jacob leaves the room, Esau walks into the room. And Esau says, "Hello, I'm here for my blessing." And Isaac says, "Who are you?" "I'm Esau, I'm here for my blessing." "Oh, your brother just came and took your blessing." Esau gets all upset. "You took my blessing? What kind of business is that? Bless me also, father." So what does Isaac answer to that? "Sorry, man. I am a one-trick pony. I am a one blessing kind of dad. I have one blessing, and I already gave it to your brother." And he says, come on. You only have one blessing?" And Isaac says, "I'll do you a favor. I'll throw in like an afterthought blessing. I gave everything to your brother, but if he doesn't behave, then you can reclaim a little bit. That's your blessing. That's all I have left. Sorry, man." Right. What happens a few verses later? Rebecca tells Jacob, you gotta flee because your brother wants to kill you. So Rebecca goes to Isaac and says, it's good if Jacob should take some space for a little bit of time. So what does Isaac do knowing that Jacob is going to take some space? What does he do? He calls Jacob into his room, and what does he give him? Another blessing. Didn't you just finish telling Esau you had no more blessings? And let's bear in mind that at this point, Isaac should have been a little resentful. Now the gig was up. Now he knows that Yaakov took the blessing that was intended for Esau. And now he comes into his room and his father starts gushing blessings upon his head. The Almighty God will bless you, fruitful, multiply you, give you the blessing of Abraham. What are you talking about? Why didn't you give that blessing to Esau? When Esau walked in and said to his father, hey, where's my blessing? Yitzchak should have said, oh, no problem. Yeah, I have a second blessing. Here it comes. So what is this business? Blessing to Jacob. Esau is given the lesser material blessing. Jacob is blessed again with the legacy of Abraham. What do we see from this entire narrative? The second blessing, the one that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov before he departed from his father's house, what they refer to it as on the board as the spiritual blessing. Yeah, the legacy of Abraham, let's call that the spiritual blessing. That blessing was always intended to go to Jacob. The blessing, the spiritual blessing, the legacy of Abraham blessing that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov before he left home, the one which he never entertained to give to Esau, was never ever going to go to Esau. That one was intended for Yaakov, and to Yaakov it went. What is the conclusion we draw from the story? The whole conundrum, the whole deception, everything that happens in the story is the drama surrounding the material blessing. The material blessing was what was contested between the two brothers. It was the material blessing that Rivka stole for Yaakov. And when Esau comes into his father's room, Esau has no interest in the spiritual blessing. Esau wants the material blessing. To which Yitzchak responds to Esau, sorry, bud. I already gave your brother the material blessing. And now it turns out he's going to end up getting the material blessing and the spiritual blessing, which I will give him in a minute. With that in mind, I want to hop back for a second to question number 3. In question number 3, we asked, if you remember earlier in the class, what did Yitzchak see in Esau? Yitzchak was so impressed by his son's hunting skills. What did he see in his son that he wanted to give these incredible blessings over the more studious son, the wholesome Jacob? And here's where we get into what Scott referred to earlier as Yitzchak's confusion. Yitzchak, our forefather Isaac, was a deeply spiritual man. And our forefather Isaac saw realities on a very spiritual plane. And Yitzchak realized that he has 2 sons. One comes from the world of chaos, and one comes from the world of rectification. One comes from a very passionate, self-centered world, a very material world, and one comes from a more spiritual, altruistic world. So Yitzchak says, I have a plan. Let me give each child the resources they need to fulfill their role. Esau comes from Tohu. Esau comes from the world of unbridled passion and energy with no control. I will give him the material blessings. And Yaakov, the more laid-back son, the more tikkun-oriented son, the one who liked to sit and learn and not bother anybody, it is to him that I will give the spiritual blessings. Did Yitzchak not realize that Yaakov was more studious than Esau? Of course he did. And that's why he had all along intended to give him the spiritual blessings. The material blessings of the fat of the heavens, the dew of the earth, thought Yitzchak to himself, what's Yaakov going to do with that? What is Yaakov going to do with material blessings? He's a bookworm. He'll sit there with his Talmuds, and I'll make him that the God of Abraham should be his God. He'll have lots of kids. It'll be beautiful. But the material blessing should go to the Tohu-oriented child. Original plan. Esau would receive the material blessings, and Yaakov would receive the spiritual blessings. We asked further earlier in the class, we talked about the fact how this idea of meat, of going out, hunting, bringing back this delicious game is so central to the story. And before Isaac could bless his son, he needs to sink his teeth into a fat, juicy steak, and then he'll know that his son is worthy of his blessings. And that's why Yaakov has to go out and make his own steak before he comes in order to get the blessings from his father. Why are we so bothered with the steak? Explains Jewish mysticism. Because Esav's ability to transform raw resources into delicious foods was the epitome of his coming from a world of tohu, of his coming from a world of hunting, of going forth and seeking and transforming, of living a crazy life. It's a big deal to take one reality and turn it into another. It's a big deal to take a nice animal that's not bothering anybody and turn it into dinner. That was Esav's skill. And that is why before Yitzchak gave the blessing of ruling over the material world to one of his children, he says, I want to see which of you can go out there and transform raw resources into delicious foods. Who can deliver for me? I assume it's Esav. Esav is the hunter. Esav is the one who walks around with a bow and arrow all day. So Esav, go forth and show me what you're made of. Transform the resources into the delicious foods. Show me how you live a tohu life. Yaakov can't just walk into his father's room and quote him a passage of Talmud. In order for Yaakov to receive these material blessings, he also needs to mimic his brother's abilities and to transform raw resources into delicious foods. And this is why Yaakov wasn't able to get the blessings until in a deceptive way he had done exactly what his older brother was instructed to do. And that is why this meal, is so central to the story. Yes?
But Jacob couldn't have done that if it wasn't for his mother.
Oh, his mother. His mother saw something. We'll talk about his mother.
Okay.
There we go. Any questions? Yes, Scott.
And maybe because the idea came from his mother, the tikkun is not the creative type.
Right.
Okay? He would not have come up with this idea of the transformation all by
The
himself.
fusion of Tohu and Tikkun all by himself. Right. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
Right. So what Scott is asking for all those of you on Zoom is, how does someone like Yaakov make steak? How does someone like Yaakov transform raw resources into delicious foods? That ultimately came from his mother, and we're going to conclude with that. Yes, Marv, go ahead.
A basic question.
Fire.
Jacob lied
Yes, he did.
against one of the 10 commandments. Honor your father and mother. You don't lie to your parents.
What if your mother tells you to?
I don't know if I buy that.
You don't know if you buy that. So Marv, don't buy it, because that's the final question we're going to address tonight. Why specifically this came about through deception. So all the questions that we just addressed, why this happened to Rebecca, and why the deception, I promise we will get to before we end off tonight. Indeed, as has been noted now repeatedly, all of this came about through Rebecca's inspiration. Why is that? Or deception. But the idea that Yaakov should be the one to make this food, that was Rivka's idea.
Tikkun doesn't have that capacity.
Tikkun's not the kind of guy who's going to go out there and cook. Why is that? Because Rivka was the one who heard the prophecy. When Rivka was experiencing all of this turmoil in her womb, she was the one who was told that you have these two realities clashing in your womb. Tohu and Tikkun are clashing in your womb. And ultimately, what's important to remember? The Rav Yavoid Tzoyer, the elder will worship the younger. Tohu will one day bend its knee to Tikkun. Tikkun will rule, but with a sprinkling of Tohu involved. Rivka is the one who was told this prophecy from God. And so now Rivka thinks to herself, well, this is no good. This is no good at all. What does my husband want to do? My husband thinks that Tohu and Tikkun can exist on an island. Tohu is out here doing its thing. The material world is all material, and the spiritual world is all spiritual. And in Isaac's vision, you know what regulated the material world? The material world. Which, if you think about it in our context, would have been an epic disaster. Let's go back to our example of the Tohu world, of the business that had a lot of money, a lot of ideas, and no strategy. And so in the first 3 months, they've burned through all the cash. Effectively, you know what Yitzchak wanted to do to that company? Throw more cash at it. Give it more blessings, give Tohu more power, and hope that at some point the ship will right itself. So Rivka, no. Ships don't right themselves. Tohu doesn't just get a hold of itself all of a sudden, and passion just, straightens itself up and starts following a pattern. That just does not happen. You know what structures Tohu? Tikkun. In order for that company to work with all of its cash, the old cash and the new cash and all the cash it has, it requires a business strategy. The material blessings need to go to Jacob. The material blessings, this infusion of spiritual power, need to go to a world of tikkun. Tikkun will allow Tohu to thrive under regulations. So it won't be a strictly Tohu existence. We don't believe in strictly Tohu existences. Strictly Tohu existences are no good. They crash and burn. They don't have any long-term viability. So Rivka was the one who realized that Tohu cannot exist on itself out there on an island, and Tikkun is out here on an island, and they're each going to work. There's a beautiful interpretation which we'll all appreciate, having been at lesson 1. In lesson 1, we talked about the fact that after the sin of the Eitz Hadas, of the tree of knowledge, there was no such thing as objective good and bad. Right? Everything is mishmash together. It was that context that Rebecca had that said you can't just have Tohu out here on itself regulating itself. Even with the noblest of intentions, even having received the blessing from Isaac. Because there's no such thing as total good. There's going to be negativity that's going to be involved in this fashion, and it's going to go the wrong way. We need a fusion. We need Tohu and Tikkun working together. We need the blessings to go to Jacob. We need the blessings to go specifically to Jacob. And then the elder will serve the younger, Tikkun will rule, and we will sprinkle in Tohu where we can to bring passion into the structure so things do not get too boring. That prophecy was known to Rivka and Rivka alone. And that is why it was Rivka who said to Yaakov, who said to her non-hunting son, hey buddy, guess what? New world order. You know what you're going to go and do now? You're going to go and hunt. I said, huh? Mom, my brother hunts. He says, no. Guess what? New system. Now Tikkun needs to get out there and act a little bit passionate. Tikkun needs to change its course a little bit and bring a little bit of Tohu into the mix, because this is only going to work if there's a fusion. So go do what your father thinks your brother's doing right now. Go out there and hunt. Change the reality. Do something which is outside of your nature. And then you will be the one to receive these blessings. But it was specifically through Rivka's inspiration, knowing of the fusion of these two realities, that this was able to succeed. Because Jacob received the blessings, because those blessings were able to go into the world of Tikkun, Torah now influences the physical world, our passions, our Tohu passions, to live a productive life, to lead a successful life. Torah does not want us all to be toppers. Torah wants us to succeed. Torah wants us to thrive. Torah wants us to live a passionate physical life, yet ultimately always influenced by the Torah, where the world of Tikkun continues its dominion over the world of. And now I want to bring ourselves to the final question. The one that Marv had asked earlier. Why was it necessary for this whole thing to happen by deception? Why didn't Rivka, and on the contrary, based on what Sue and Scott asked earlier, that this all happened with Rivka's influence, Rivka should have barked into her husband and said, hey, honey, while you were out napping one day, I was having prophecies. And I got a prophecy when I was pregnant. I learned about the fusion of these worlds, Tohu and Tikkun, which you are aware of. The only reason you want to bless Esav is because you see his great spiritual source in the world of Tohu. I know plenty about Tohu and Tikkun, and I'm telling you, there needs to be a fusion over here. Why did it have to happen through deception? Who are we up to in reading? Jody, I believe. Text 7 on page 94.
Jacob's cunning was necessary in order to correct the sin of the tree of knowledge, which also came about through the cunning and enticement of the serpent, the coarsening of all the worlds, and the intermingling of materialism and spirituality. To rectify this, drawing down spirituality and supernal power into materialism.
Explain the mystics, and Marv, this should answer your question, why the deception. Isaac, at that point, as he considered himself on his way into a different reality, Isaac was so spiritual that he was seeing the world through a prism that had existed in the Garden of Eden before the sin. Isaac was living a utopian reality. Like it is in many relationships, the men live in utopian realities, and the women are the ones who know dollars and cents, and the women are the ones who know, the way things are in actuality. But Isaac was living in the lofty garden reality. You know what the problem is with the lofty garden reality? It's not reality. It's not reality. In fact, as we learned in lesson 1, the serpent's deception created a mixture of good and evil. The serpent came along and blew up the whole garden reality. We don't live in a world of garden reality anymore, honey. And so because the world at that point was living in a different reality than the garden reality, Jacob's deception was there to counteract the serpent's deception. God had installed in the world that there was one lie that we talked about in lesson 1, which took the world in a certain direction. And Jacob's deception was kind of the counteract, was the revenge against the serpent to bring the world slowly back to a more garden-like reality. So from the moment of the serpent's deception, the world had been fooled. The world had been taken for a ride by the forces of deception. And it was Jacob's responsibility, influenced by his mother, who knew of God's ultimate vision for the fusion of chaos and rectification. It was Jacob's job to counteract the deception and to even the scales in the world a little bit. So Marv, should you honor your father and mother? Absolutely. Should you lie to your father if your mother tells you so? If it's an outright lie, probably not a good idea. But the point of the story is that the divine intuition, the spiritual power of prophecy that Rivka had that influenced this decision ultimately was the one that was correct, and thus it was the one that prevailed over Jacob, over Yaakov. Marv, does that answer your question? Does that satisfy you for tonight? I'll unmute you for a second. Hold on to that, Marv. There you go.
Possibly it could have been done in a better way.
We could have been a little bit more PC. Marv, in the rewrite, we'll redo that episode and we'll make it a little bit more appealing to the writers. I want to conclude with the following idea. They tell the story. Yankel is lying on his deathbed. He's gasping his last few breaths of air, and he says, Hinda, are you there? She says, yes, Yankel, I'm here. He says, what about Shlomo, my son? Is Shlomo here? Yes, Shlomo's here. What about Miriam, my daughter? Is Miriam here? Yes, honey, Miriam's here. So if all three of you are standing here, who's running the store? Yeah? I want to take a look for a second on page 94 at the final questions for us to consider. When we say should we, the hypotheticals that we're asking over here, think about this from, a best case scenario on the spiritual side. Should we care about material success? In the big picture, yeah, practically, but in the big picture, should that be the ultimate focus of our lives? Ideally, from God's perspective, no. We should be caring about using all of our material success for higher purposes. So no, we should not care about material success. Is it possible to succeed in business or in any endeavor requiring material resources if one does not care? Imagine tomorrow all of us ran a company, and tomorrow we come into our office and all of our employees come and say, boss, what should we do today? What's today's course of action? You know what we say to them? Doesn't matter! I don't care what you do today. You know why? I went to jail last night and they told me that in the Torah it says we shouldn't care about material success. So go forth, you all have an extended lunch break from now till 2024, and God will provide. You know the famous story about God will provide? Young girl brings her boyfriend home for the first time to meet the parents, and they're sitting down at the table and they're schmoozing, and the father takes the young man to his study to find out what we're dealing with over here. So he says, young man, do you have a degree? He says, no, God will provide. He says, do you have any sort of business experience? He says, no, God will provide. Do you have any plan if you one day marry my daughter, how you're going to support a family? He says, no, God will provide. So the husband comes out of the study. The wife says, how'd it go? The husband says, I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is he's a total shlamaf. The good news is he thinks I'm God. Yeah, so if we're all of us can have the mentality of God will provide. That's not a way to go about life. We have families to feed. So we answer no to both questions. If we answered no to both questions, we realize, and this really goes back to what we talked about in lesson 1, how the lessons of Jewish mysticism are not just providing context and color for an episode that happened thousands of years ago between two brothers. The teachings of Jewish mysticism educate us and enlighten us to what's happening in our lives in 2020. Jewish mysticism teaches us that we live in a world where on one hand, we need to be involved in something. We need to have a little bit of tohu. We need to have a little bit of passion and energy in the physical world. Why? Not because we're greedy, and not because we lust after riches and fame and fortune. We need to provide for our families. We need to elevate the world around us. We need a fusion of tohu and tikkun. We need to take the structure of our lives and allow it to marshal and to exercise control and to lead and to manage the passion of our lives, the passion for material pursuits, so ultimately we can live a life of great success, materially and spiritually, but ultimately the goal will be for the spiritual pursuits to overpower and to control and to have the final word over all of our material aspirations. And so I think it's really tonight where we see, Tohu and Tikkun, the battle between Jacob and Esau, the struggle over these blessings is not only a story that happened, because it is a story that happened. It's not an allegory, and it's not an example, and it's not an analogy. It's a story that actually happened. But it's a story that actually happened, which happened thousands of years ago and happens in our own lives every single day on a regular basis. And the guidance and the secrets the Torah teaches us about the story of Jacob and Esau must influence our lives as we go about them on a regular basis, as we each succeed to balance our own tohu and our own tikkun. I'm going to play the key points on page 95, and then I'll take any final questions.
Lesson 3, Jacob and Esau. 1. The two kingdoms embodied by the biblical Jacob and Esau exist on many levels. As the historic nations of Judea and Rome, as the spiritual and material perspectives on life, as the altruistic and selfish instincts in the human psyche, and as the cosmic worlds of Tikkun and Tohu. 2. Everything is composed of light and vessels, the pure energy of the thing and the structures and the mechanisms through which it operates. But there are two models of existence. The Tikkun model is one of scant light and abundant vessels, meaning that the vessels contain and focus their energies. In the Tohu model, there is abundant light and scant vessels, meaning that the driving energy is constantly bursting free of the structures through which it is meant to operate. 3. Each model has its advantages and disadvantages. Tikkun is harmonious and orderly, but constrained. Tohu is innovative and limit-breaking, but also strife-ridden and unstable. An additional disadvantage to the Tohu model is that it is prone to corruption, resulting either in the dissipation of its energies or in their exploitation by evil. 4. Because Tohu preceded Tikkun, we can tap the advantages of both models, drawing on the powerful Tohu elements present in our Tikkun reality as remnants of an earlier world. But this is also the reason that the Jacob in us, our instincts towards spirituality and altruism, faces an uphill battle in its efforts to master the more primordial Tohu forces in our eternal Esau, the unbridled passions of the animal soul, the uncontainable force of the human ego, and the unsatisfiable ambitions of a materialistic life. 5. Isaac believed that Tohu and Tikkun could coexist side by side, each blessed with resources to fully develop its realm in accordance with the divine plan for creation. Rebecca, however, understood that the material world that is ruled by materialists will not rise to its true purpose, but will descend into corruption. The powerful resources of Tohu can only be redeemed when Jacob is made master of Esau. 6. In our own lives, we need to internalize both sides of the Isaac-Rebekah argument. Like Isaac, we need to recognize the powerful potential for good that lies in our tohu self. Like Rebekah, we need to understand that in order to properly utilize this potential, we have to place our tikkun self firmly in control of our lives. 7. Every time we interact with the material world, we reenact the drama of the stolen blessings. We become a spiritual Jacob who assumes the guise of a materialistic Esau in caring about the material success for the ulterior motive of making our world a holier, more godly place.
If you thought that issues between siblings was bad this week, I challenge you to join us next Monday, November 30th at 7:30 p.m. We will talk about Joseph and his brothers, where things get very, very, very hairy. And as always, we take one biblical story and we see the very profound lessons that it has in our entire life. And next week, we're going to be tackling such a fundamental question. What is more important? Self-refinement or refining the world around us? Assuming that we cannot accomplish both in the same moment, is it more important to take 5 minutes to make myself a better person or to make the world around me a better one? I hope you'll join us either next week in person. We're down to 7 participants in person. I don't know who we're going to be losing by next week. I hope to see you all in person. It's nice to have people to talk to. I stare at black boxes all day now for a living. Zoomers, we love you too. Come and see us on Zoom next week if you can join us in person. If you can join us in person, we'd love to see you on Monday at 7:30. The recap will go out tomorrow morning to get to the class recording, and I will see you all next week. Have a very, very happy Thanksgiving. May you forever be thankful and grateful for the blessings you have in life, and we will see you next month.